Pilots are how every animated cartoon and TV series in general is first brought to life. It's every show's starting point. Sometimes the pilot will remain a staple in the series should it be given the green light, while other times, even if the show does take off, sometimes the pilot will have minor to drastic differences before the show is finalized and is left out of the series run. But those are always the most interesting ones, aren't they? I'll be looking at pilots from my favorite cartoons from my youth and determine if they were a prominent start to a good show or should be damned to the eternal abyss. But before we start, there's already a video on cartoon pilots by Pat Mac, so if you've already seen that video or just hate yourself, feel free to continue watching because I will be covering shows that he didn't cover in his video. We'll start with 2 Nickelodeon shows, then 2 Cartoon Network shows, and finally 2 bonuses, one of them being spoiled in the thumbnail because I'm a good YouTuber. Let's begin with probably my favorite animated series of all time, a show with rich, deep and developing characters, insanely thought-provoking and in-depth lore, with animation that would make even a blind person have a seizure. It's SpongeBob. This is my favorite cartoon of all time. I'm dead serious. There's no other cartoon that I have a stronger nostalgia connection with than SpongeBob. So I'm very happy I get to talk about it today. It's no secret that the man behind this masterpiece is the late Steven Hillenburg, a marine biologist that made his own characters and comics about sea creatures to teach his students about sea life, one of them being the Intertidal Zone featuring Bob the Sponge. Take a guess where this is going. Hillenburg did work at Nickelodeon as an animator for shows like Rocko's Modern Life, and he eventually pitched his own show to Nick called, guess what? Sponge Boy Ahoy. Okay, we're almost there. He ended up further developing his cast of characters and art style, and finally presented his idea to Nickelodeon, apparently with tanks of water showing off the models of his characters with Hawaiian music to set the mood. God, I wish I could see footage of that meeting. And thus, Spongeman Ice Cone was born. And as for the first episode, Help Wanted, honestly, it's not too far off from how the show came to be. There's honestly no huge differences in the pilot that I can talk about aside from the more saturated colors and the fact that this episode is sometimes left out in wide releases due to the featured song Living in the Sunlight, Lovin' in the Moonlight from when SpongeBob goes sicko mode to feed the disabled. But there is an alternate original intro that I didn't even know existed.
I'm ready. SpongeBob SquarePants.
It was very obviously changed after the first airing, but hey, I still think that's cool to know. Other than that, everything you expect from SpongeBob is here and accounted for. I know I didn't have much to say about this one, but trust me, we're just getting started. I know I love SpongeBob unconditionally, but this is the pilot that made me want to do this video. I know y'all are already probably tired of hearing me suck the balls of Avatar dry, but we're doing something different this time. We're spicing things up, if you know what I mean. And unlike SpongeBob, the original Avatar pilot has a plethora of differences from the final show. This episode is not canon, nor is it included in most releases, and nor did it even air. So needlessly to say, I'm very excited. The show was created by 2 absolute giga chads, Michael and Brian, with last names that I refuse to even attempt to pronounce. They created Avatar, a show that was heavily influenced by Asian cultures such as China and Korea, and speaking of Korea, on a quick side note, one really cool fact I learned researching the creative process behind these shows, I found out that there was a time where most Western cartoons were made mostly by Korean studios overseas, where they were about as respected as the Loud House fanbase.
Oh my god, bro. Oh, hell no.
I read you loud and clear, Mom.
What the fuck? This was something that prompted animator LaShawn Thomas, who was known for his work on the Boondocks, to move to Korea to help out the process of the show, leading to Brian and his team following in his footsteps with the creative process of Avatar, and you can feel that passion and work all throughout the series. And after watching the original pilot, I can safely say I completely understand why this was left out. but I also kind of love it. First off, the animation is clearly a lot choppier and less refined, but it's still better than I thought it would be. This episode is pretty much just a generalization of the first season, with the crew escaping the clutches of the Fire Nation who, by the way, are drippy as hell. I really like these outfits, they're way more interesting than the final versions. And one thing that is immediately noticeable in this version is Aang's personality. He's way different, he's a lot more cocky, and to be honest, I kind of fuck with this energy. I'm glad they made him more naive yet wise in the show, but this is a very fun change of pace.
This is your bison. You taught me.
Yep, it appears I taught you well. What's the matter, Zuko? Can't handle me alone?
You have nowhere left to go.
You sure about that?
Although Katara in this episode isn't actually called Katara.
Kaya! Who?
Other than that, she's pretty much unscathed, although for some reason she doesn't have leggings under her robe, which is pretty jarring but does give us this amazing scene.
Come on, Kaya. You're flying with the Avatar. Start acting like it.
Zuko is also like beat for beat first season Zuko, with his honor fade and everything. He also has this fight with Aang on top of some scaffolding, which is actually really fucking sick. Like, not only does the animation not slack at all, but the music is incredible. This is probably the best fight Aang has ever had with Zuko in terms of bending and choreography. They don't really fight as much in this series as you might think, and this honestly is probably the best one. I will say one thing I don't like about this pilot is Sokka. He's really not given anything funny to say, and he's honestly kind of a dick.
What's your problem, Airboy?
Right, so once again, I have to do everything.
Stupid short firebender ropes, and stupid short Aang.
Also, this is the first time we ever see Aang's avatar state, which he does on command, by the way, and it's not too impressive, but it does give us another hilarious scene. But in conclusion, I do like this pilot, and I'm glad I was able to talk about it. Plus, it has the best ending to any Avatar episode ever, with Aang just killing himself and the screen cutting to black.
Ah!
Absolute perfection. Switching gears over to Cartoon Network, we have The Amazing World of Gumball, created by Ben... last name. And I don't even think I can properly put into words what I like about this show. It's just funny.
Yes, we're all agreed. Everyone has it equally bad.
Well, no. Actually, there are some real imbalances that...
Exactly. Turns out everyone has it the worst.
Oh, no, that's the problem. Men just don't listen. Women always get cut off in the middle.
And the show just has great and memorable characters, including a very unique art style where almost every character is animated in a different style, which I can imagine is a lot of fun for the animators. And unlike the previous two cartoons, there's no deeply rooted backstory to go over. So fuck it, let's jump right into the pilot. No, not the first episode, the original short from 2008, simply called Gumball. Oh dear God, what have I done? Now, for the most part, this looks like any other episode. Until you get to Gumball and Darwin. Instead of them both being 2D like in the show, Darwin is just a CG pile of orange Play-Doh and is for some reason British.
Ready? Ready! Ready for what?
And as for Gumball, he sure has seen better days. He also has a different voice actor here. It's the same guy who did the voice of Chowder.
Whoa, I just had the weirdest dream. Never mind.
There's only a few other characters that have differences from the final show aside from the main boys. Alan's face is drawn differently, and to be honest, I had to look up the names for some of these characters to remind myself because the only thing I remember about Alan is the time he or she was getting head.
I don't think I have the strength to inflate.
Oh! No! No!
And Terry the Paper Girl is actually a boy in the pilot and gets sucked into the girls' locker room. I have no comment. The pilot itself is actually very creative. The whole premise is our characters escaping school, and while the plan is in motion, we get to see most of the cast, and it ends up with the plan backfiring and they end up in Hector's ass. I could not have asked for a better ending, but we don't get to see their family, which means we don't get to see Richard, the god of sex himself. Therefore, I'm banishing this pilot to the abyss. 0 out of 10, can't wait for the movie. Regular Show is one of the most bizarre things I have ever watched. It's literally just a show about a mismatch of human, animal, and inanimate object characters working at a park. But what makes it so engaging, aside from the phenomenal cast of characters, is that we can go from this to this in the span of 20 minutes. This show will absolutely give you whiplash, but you won't want it to stop. It's like the world's funniest and most enthralling LSD trip.
Yeah, but the hose!
hose! Oh, what? It's too hard to get the hose?
But much like Gumball, we're not looking at the first episode because frankly it's not too different from the final release. Instead, we're gonna take a gander at the original draft for regular show, 2 in the AM PM, where the plot is two dudes are working at a gas station, and yeah, there's no color and it's not a full-fledged pilot, but it's still fascinating to look at. It's just two dudes working at a gas station when all of a sudden they do some hardcore drugs and they end up tripping the fattest of balls and eventually change to Mordecai and Benson. There's no Rigby in sight, but I kinda like this duo. There's just so much to talk about here, from the drug trip being the obvious basis for where the show would eventually go, Benson being worried about getting fired, oh how the turns have tabled, and hearing the voice actors actually swear makes me feel like I can die happy.
Well, when is it supposed to kick in?
Right fucking now.
Cool.
Fuck off!
This show was most likely pitched to be on Adult Swim, but I'm guessing the executives at Cartoon Network liked what they saw and wanted the show to be seen by as many people as possible, which unfortunately meant that they couldn't do anything adult-oriented. But don't worry, you still get bits and pieces in the show of what could have been. Who knows if regular show would have actually been better with no restrictions, but either way I was glad to see it come to life, and I was not expecting to like the show as much as I did. Sonic has had an interesting history, to say the least. They collabed with Hooters, what the shit? But I was always a huge fan growing up, and Sonic X was a show I could not get enough of. I was never able to watch it on TV, so instead I would often watch re-uploads on YouTube. There was just something about this show that really pulled me in as a Sonic fan. All the character designs were flawless, their personalities were on point, and it took a ton of inspiration from the adventure games, which was just bliss. There were actually 2 pilots for this show, and much like other pilots, these were not structured like an actual episode. One of them isn't even called Sonic X. They're essentially just the show's intro with a lot more stuff in it, and there is a lot to break down here. Throughout the series, Sonic would get powered up by using rings, but for some reason here they're replaced with these nameless crystals. The world these pilots take place in have no signs of humans and are instead a bunch of different animals, which I'm very glad was swapped out for normal people. There's even a small tease of Shadow the Hedgehog, who wouldn't join the series until much later.
Hey, it's me, Sonic the Hedgehog. You know, my least favorite thing about Shadow, he's a dirty fucking nick.
We still have our normal cast of characters from Sonic to Eggman and even Sora, but there is one massive thing in the second pilot that features a character that would never come to fruition in anything Sonic related outside of this one small clip.
Sonic Cat!
This nameless character would never be used in the show or anything outside of this pilot. However, Chakra X on YouTube took this design and made him the antagonist for his fan animation Nazo Unleashed, making him known as Nazo, which translates to mystery. It turns out this was actually going to be another form for Sonic in the future of the show. Was this going to be their version of Hyper Sonic? I mean, fuck knows, but still a strange footnote in Sonic's history.
Number 2, child pornography. Peter has an impressive collection of pornography, but one of the more extreme and extremely disturbing parts of his collection is his possession of pornography depicting minors.
Family Guy as a show has for sure run its course, but it has had its hilarious moments, and I remember being drawn to the show as a kid simply for the fact that it was for adults, and I thought that this was just the funniest shit ever.
Oh, look, a tie! Perfect!
It's not gonna shock anyone that the man behind Family Guy is Seth MacFarlane. This show would never have gotten made without him and his contributions to the animation industry. The original incarnation of Family Guy goes all the way back to a short made and voiced by MacFarlane called The Life of Larry from 1994, which was a student project eventually turned full-fledged pilot, which actually did air on Boomerang as Larry and Steve, which were clear prototypes for Peter and Brian. However, Larry and Steve was aimed towards a younger demographic, which meant that there was no real swearing and only really had gags related to real life stuff. In the end, this pilot ended up going nowhere, but then Fox contacted MacFarlane about a full series based on what they had seen. And so MacFarlane combined elements from both concepts, such as the broad humor and real world references. He ended up changing some designs, added more characters, and voila, we have the actual Family Guy pilot. It's here where we finally get a look at the Family Guy cast looking quite rougher than usual and sporting different drip. Almost all of them are different colors than the final show, and Lois has blonde blonde hair, but there are still characters here that would become mainstays, and there was a pilot in Larry and Steve that would eventually become Quagmire, since it was the same voice actor and Quagmire still remains a pilot in the final show. I wish there was more to talk about here, but sadly there's only like 7 minutes of this footage you can find online, whereas this is reportedly a 15-minute pilot. This episode was redone into the first episode of the series called Death is a Shadow, and would premiere along with the rest of the show following Super Bowl 33 in 1999. The rest of the pilot is completely lost, which is always sad to see. The honest to god thing about pilots is that we're extremely lucky if we even get to see them. It's obvious from looking at the shit that we've seen in this video that pilots vary greatly in terms of quality, and sometimes we don't even really get to see them, or in the case of Family Guy, don't get to see the rest of it. It took years for the original pitch of Jimmy Neutron to be found and released, and some pilots might be pitched but not picked up until many years later, like in the case of Phineas and Ferb. Making a TV series, no matter what it's about or what genre it is, takes a fuck ton of work, and it's a miracle if your passion can even get past the pilot stage. But this was a lot of fun looking back to the starting point of some of my favorite shows, and I hope y'all enjoyed it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm tired of editing this shit, and I have another night of being bitchless to attend.
At times I recline way back and puff stacks with relations to rap my conversations about the devils we be lacing in the revolution. Be enormous how I'm trooping. My mind has been in battle since birth. That's why I'm puffing L's and juicing like a man in arms regrouping, planning my attack on the